Get out, Kofi. Those were the first words my wife said to me after signing the biggest deal of her life. Not hello, not sit down, not we need to talk. Just get out. And the strange part is, even now, when I replay that night in my head, I still remember the sound before I remember the words. The glasses, the laughter, the soft jazz floating through our penthouse living room. The applause from people who suddenly cared very much about my wife because her company had just landed a $41 million infrastructure contract. Then came silence. The kind of silence that only happens when a room realizes a private cruelty is about to become public. My name is Kofi Mensah. I'm 39 years old. And 2 nights before my wife discovered my name inside the file that made her victory possible, she stood in front of our guests, beside another man, and threw me out of my own home. What Amara did not know that night, what none of the people smiling with champagne in their hands knew, was that the deal she was celebrating had only survived the final review because of me. Not as her husband, not as the quiet man she had learned to overlook, but as the analyst whose signature sat buried deep inside the approval documents her entire future depended on. And when she finally saw it, she didn't cry first. She stopped breathing. If you've ever watched someone mistake your silence for weakness, then stay with me. Because this story is not about revenge. It's about what happens when people only notice your value after they've already gambled everything against you. I live in Nairobi, or I used to, back when I still thought a marriage could be held together by patience alone. Our apartment sat high above Riverside Drive, all glass walls and designer furniture, and carefully arranged signs of success. It was Amara's taste everywhere. The sculpted lamps, the imported marble table, the abstract paintings with aggressive price tags. The place looked like ambition had moved in and decided it deserved a view. And to be fair, Amara had built a lot. She was brilliant, sharp, beautiful in the kind of way that made people sit straighter when she entered a room. She ran a consulting firm called Vanta Advisory, and over the past 5 years, she had transformed it from a respected mid-size operation into something bigger, louder, and much more dangerous. Success changes some people gently. It changed Amara like fire changes metal. It made her cleaner, harder, brighter, and less reachable. When we first met, she used to laugh with her whole body. Back then, she wore her hair wrapped in bright scarves on lazy Sundays and sat cross-legged on the floor, eating roasted maize from paper bags when we drove out past Limuru just to escape the city for an hour. Back then, if I fixed her laptop at 2 in the morning before a client presentation, she would kiss my forehead and say, "I don't know what I would do without you." Later, she stopped saying that. Then she stopped noticing it. That is how invisible love begins to die. Not with one explosion, with repetition, with being useful for so long that people stop seeing the person and only remember the service. I worked as head of systems integrity at a regional logistics firm. Stable salary, clean record, good work, the kind of job families call respectable right before they ask why you're not earning more. What almost nobody knew, including my wife, was that I had spent the last 3 years quietly building a private risk review company under my mother's registered entity. Small at first, 1 contract, then 2, then cross-border compliance work, then due diligence for firms that preferred discreet analysts over loud consultants in expensive ties. I built it at night. I built it on weekends. I built it in airport lounges and empty office corridors, and at our dining table while Amara slept after client dinners I was no longer invited to. I did not hide it because I planned to deceive her. I hid it because every time money came up around her family, I was made to feel like I was applying for permission to belong. Her older brother Sizwe used to ask questions with a smile that never touched his eyes. "So, Kofi, still doing IT?" As long as Amara is happy, I suppose that's enough. You're lucky, my brother. Women like Amara don't come around twice. Lucky. I heard that word for years. Lucky she chose me. Lucky she stayed. Lucky she tolerated my quietness. Lucky her rise reflected well on me. People like Sizwe never understand silent men. They assume if you don't announce what you're building, then you are building nothing. I let them think that. There is a certain freedom in being underestimated by people who only know how to measure worth in public. The week everything fell apart began on a Thursday. That morning, Amara barely touched her breakfast. She stood near the kitchen island in a cream suit, tapping through emails, her phone vibrating every few seconds with congratulations that hadn't even fully happened yet. The contract with Mavuno Transit Group was set to close by afternoon. It was the biggest deal in company history, and if it landed cleanly, her firm would move from respected to untouchable. I made her coffee the way I always had. No sugar, tiny drop of milk, mug warmed first. She took it without looking at me. "You'll be late," she said. That was all. No smile, no nervous excitement. No, today could change everything. Just the tone people use with furniture they don't want to trip over. I remember watching her leave and feeling something I didn't want to name. Not fear, recognition. As if some buried part of me already understood that success was about to give her permission to stop pretending she still needed a husband. At work that day, I received 2 emails within an hour. The first came from a client in Johannesburg, confirming that the final governance packet for a transport consortium had been approved. My analysis had been accepted with no revisions. Payment was already in process. The second was an internal notice from Mavuno's legal review team, sent to my secured consulting inbox under the name K.A. Mensa Advisory Services, acknowledging receipt of my last compliance recommendation. The irony hit me only for a second. The deal Amara had spent months chasing. The one she was dressing for. The one she was about to toast in rooms full of executives. I had been one of the last people to clear it. Not because I knew it was hers. Because the company name had been buried inside layers of holding entities and partner structures, and I had reviewed it as I reviewed all serious files. On merit, on numbers, on exposure, on risk. By the time I realized which firm sat behind one branch of the deal, my work had already moved too far through the process to be personally meaningful. I thought about telling her once. Then I remembered her brother laughing over dinner 3 months earlier, asking if I had ever considered doing real consulting instead of fixing office systems. So I said nothing. I let the work stand. That evening, rain was beginning to collect on the city roads when I got home earlier than expected. The door was unlocked. Music drifted out before I even stepped inside. Champagne, perfume, laughter. Voices too polished to be relaxed. There were maybe 12 people in the living room. 2 board members from her firm. A politician's son who called himself an investor. 3 people from a partner bank. And standing far too close to my wife, hand resting against the bare curve of her lower back, was Daniel Okeke. Daniel was the external strategy advisor she had insisted was just useful to have around. Men like Daniel are easy to read if you've met enough of them. Beautiful suit, expensive watch. Voice tuned carefully between charm and ownership. Every sentence half performance, half threat. The kind of man who always looks like he is listening, when in truth, he is only calculating. Amara saw me near the doorway, and her smile changed shape. Not softened, tightened. "Kofi," she said, like my presence was an administrative inconvenience. "You're early." I congratulated her. I actually meant it, which embarrasses me now more than anger would. A few people murmured greetings. Daniel lifted his glass and smiled at me in that polished, contemptuous way some men reserve for husbands they have already erased. Then Amara put her glass down, folded her arms, and said, "Can we not do this tonight?" I said, "Do what?" And she answered in a voice quiet enough to sound controlled and loud enough for everyone nearest us to hear. "This marriage, this performance, I'm done, Kofi." I think one woman near the balcony actually stopped chewing. Nobody moved. Nobody ever knows what to do when cruelty arrives wearing a calm face. I looked at Amara, then at Daniel. His hand had left her back now, but too late, too obviously. I asked her if she was serious. She said, "I've been serious for a long time." Not angry, not emotional, not uncertain. Prepared. That was the part that chilled me most. It is one thing to be betrayed in passion. Another thing entirely to realize someone rehearsed your humiliation and waited for the right backdrop. I asked if we could speak privately. She shook her head. "No. I don't want another long conversation where you act confused and I carry your emotions for you. Pack what you need and leave tonight." There's a moment in every collapse where your body understands before your mind does. My hands became very still. The music was still playing. Somewhere behind us, someone lowered a glass onto the marble too carefully, trying not to make noise, which somehow made the whole room even louder. I looked at Daniel once. He gave me that small, sympathetic nod arrogant men use when they want credit for not smiling. That was when I knew. Not suspected. Knew. I went to the bedroom and took a duffel bag from the closet. I remember absurd details from those 10 minutes. The scent of Amara's perfume on a scarf draped over a chair. A broken zipper pull on my old travel bag. The city lights beginning to wake up outside the windows. A cufflink under the bed that wasn't mine. Then, while pulling a stack of old tax folders from the top shelf, I knocked loose a slim cream notebook. A folded page slipped from it and landed near my shoe. I almost ignored it. Then I saw Amara's handwriting. "Call attorney as soon as Mavuno closes. Move personal holdings before announcement. If Kofi becomes difficult, use salary records and non-compete pressure." I read it once. Then again. Then a third time. Because sometimes pain arrives so cleanly, the brain refuses to stamp it as real. If Kofi becomes difficult. That line did something to me. Not because it was cruel, because it stripped me down to an obstacle. Not husband, not partner. Not human being with history and memory and love. A possible inconvenience in a financial strategy. I folded the note and placed it in my bag. Then I packed slowly, methodically, as if precision could protect me from shock. When I came back into the living room, the room tried not to stare. Amara stood near the bar, chin lifted. Daniel had moved beside the windows, hands in pockets, pretending distance. I wanted, for one stupid second, to tell them all. To say the deal she was celebrating had my fingerprints on it. To ask if Daniel knew whose report saved her risk profile during final review. To watch her face break in front of all those polished people. But pain makes fools of men who speak too early. So I picked up my bag, looked at my wife one last time, and said only this. "You should be very careful what you celebrate before you know who built it." I don't think she even understood the sentence. I walked out. The rain had grown heavier by then. Nairobi at night in the rain turns reflective. Headlights stretch across wet roads. Buildings look softer from a distance, as if the city is trying to blur its own edges. I drove to my mother's house in Lavington. She opened the gate before I could knock. Mothers know the shape of disaster before language does. She took one look at my face, stepped aside and said, "Tea first, then truth." So I told her, not like a hero, not with dignity, not in some controlled cinematic stream. I told her like a man who had been holding up a ceiling for years and had just discovered it was never attached to anything solid. She listened without interrupting. My mother, Adwoa Mensa, has a gift for silence that heals instead of punishes. When I finished, she sat across from me at the kitchen table, fingers curled around her mug, and said, "Kofi, some people only recognize a roof after they have burned the house." I almost laughed. Then I almost broke. Instead, I asked her a question that now sounds pathetic in memory. Was I really that easy to discard? She looked offended on my behalf. "No, you were easy to use quietly. That is different. There are sentences that arrive like medicine and wounds at the same time." That was one of them. The next morning, I did something I should have done months earlier. I pulled every document connected to my private advisory work. Every invoice, every retainer, every approval trail, every secure correspondence tied to K.A. Mensa Advisory Services and the parent registration under my mother's entity. Then I looked again at the Mavuno packet, and there it was. Vanta Advisory, Amara's company. One branch of a 3-company consortium tied to the infrastructure proposal I had reviewed across multiple jurisdictions. My chest went cold. I had not just helped some anonymous transaction move forward. I had cleared portions of the very deal she had used as the launchpad for destroying me. There is a kind of pain that feels almost mathematical. Every detail starts locking into place, and the picture becomes worse with each confirmation, because uncertainty was your last mercy. By midday, my phone rang from an unknown number. A woman's voice. Low. Careful. "Mr. Mensa?" "Yes." "You don't know me. My name is Nia. I work at Vanta." I said nothing. She continued quickly, as if afraid courage had an expiry time. "You need to know this wasn't sudden. Your wife's team has been asking questions about your assets for months. Daniel especially. They believed you had no real leverage, but they wanted proof." My grip tightened around the phone. "How do you know that?" "Because I was in rooms I wasn't supposed to be useful enough to remain invisible in." That line stayed with me. Useful enough to remain invisible. I asked why she was telling me this. She said, "Because some of us know the difference between ambition and predation." Then she ended the call. That should have been the moment I exploded. It wasn't. That's the strange thing about deep betrayal. The first stage is often not rage. It is inventory. You begin counting what was real, what was performed, what was moved behind your back. What version of you existed in the mouths of people who smiled at you over dinner? By that evening, I had more. Email fragments, a forwarded draft settlement, a records inquiry from a law office tied to Amara's family counsel, salary verification attempts sent to my employer, and one especially clean internal memo Daniel had circulated from a private address, suggesting that my predictable emotional reserve would likely make me settle quietly if pressured early. Predictable emotional reserve. I sat with that phrase for a long time. Some people see calm and think absence. Some people see restraint and think fear. Some people mistake your refusal to perform chaos for proof that you cannot create consequences. They are often very confident right before they are very wrong. 2 days after Amara threw me out, I received another call. This one changed everything. The voice on the line was male, older, controlled. No wasted movement, even in speech. "Mr. Mensa, my name is Elias Biko. I chair the independent oversight panel attached to Mavuno's regional transaction board. I believe we need to meet. We met the next morning in a private conference suite at a hotel in Upper Hill. Elias Biko was not theatrical. Tall, silver-haired, dark skin, deliberate eyes. A man who looked like he had watched many powerful people talk themselves into ruin and had grown tired of being surprised. He placed a sealed folder on the table between us. "This came to us 40 hours ago," he said, along with a secondary compliance concern we could not ignore. Inside the folder were printed messages, hotel records, internal meeting snapshots, and communication logs confirming an undisclosed relationship between Amara and Daniel throughout key phases of the deal. I was not shocked by the affair itself. What shocked me was the depth of coordination around it. Daniel had not just been sleeping with my wife. He had been using access to shape legal pressure, settlement timing, and reputational containment before the divorce became public. There are men who want the woman. There are men who want the position around the woman. Daniel wanted leverage. Amara just happened to be the door he entered through. Elias watched me take that in. Then he said, "There is one more element you need to understand." He slid forward a second document. It was my executive risk report. My report. The one signed under my advisory entity. The one containing the governance cautions that had nearly stalled final approval. My own name sat there in clean black print, undeniable and still. "K.A. Mensa," Elias said quietly. "We traced the advisory chain after receiving the anonymous package. Once your identity matched the registration record, the overlap became unavoidable." I looked at him. He continued, "For clarity, we are not accusing you of misconduct. In fact, your report may be the only honest thing in this entire corridor of behavior. But tomorrow, Vanta will appear before a board review. They do not yet know what we know. And they certainly do not know whose analysis is inside the file." I asked him what exactly he wanted from me. He answered, "Nothing improper, nothing theatrical. I want the author of that work present when the review happens. You will not advocate, you will not interfere. You will simply be there when truth becomes visible. Some opportunities do not feel like victory. They feel like gravity finally deciding to work in your direction." I said, "Yes." That night I slept maybe 2 hours. Not because I was afraid of facing Amara, because I finally understood the shape of what she had misjudged. She thought my quietness meant I had no second life beyond what she could measure. She thought my steadiness meant she could plan around me. She thought if she attacked me through paperwork and pressure, I would enter the story only as aftermath. She had no idea that my name already existed inside the room she was walking toward. The board session was held the next morning in a glass-walled executive chamber overlooking the city. I arrived early. Dark shirt, no tie. One watch, one folder. No desire to perform pain for anyone. Elias seated me near the middle of the long table, facing the door. The screen at the far end glowed blue in standby mode. Everything was too quiet. At exactly 10 o'clock, the doors opened. Amara stepped in first. Black tailored suit, hair pinned neatly, portfolio under one arm. Face composed in that perfected executive calm she wore when rooms were supposed to submit before she spoke. Daniel entered behind her, already smiling slightly, the way men do when they believe outcome belongs to them. Then Amara saw me. There are moments so exact they feel engineered. Her stride stopped, but her body still carried half an inch forward. Her expression did not collapse dramatically. It froze. The smile she had prepared remained on her mouth just long enough to become eerie. Daniel followed her line of sight and went still too, but his reaction was different. Not shock. Calculation. He knew immediately this was bad. He just didn't yet know how bad. Elias welcomed them both, invited them to sit, and waited until the room settled. Then he said, very simply, "Before we begin, I need to note for the record that the independent due diligence review attached to this transaction was authored by the analyst presently seated in this room." No one spoke. Amara's eyes moved to me again. Elias clicked the remote. The first page appeared on the screen. Regional Governance Risk Assessment. Prepared by K.A. Mensa Advisory Services. Lead Analyst, Kofi A. Mensa. I have seen people lose color before. I have never seen it happen so elegantly. Amara did not gasp. Daniel did not interrupt. That is how you know the hit landed deep. Truly dangerous revelations don't create noise first. They create silence. Elias turned one page, then another, then another. My name on the executive summary. My name on the compliance notes. My name on the governance caution attached to leadership conduct. My name beneath the final recommendation that kept the transaction alive under strict conditions. Each page said the same thing without ever raising its voice. You built part of the future you used to push him aside. You just didn't know who he was when he was doing it. I kept my hands folded. Amara stared at the screen for 3 full seconds before looking back at me. And in that look, I saw it all at once. The dinner table dismissals, the small humiliations, the careful assumptions, the confidence with which she had built a strategy around the idea that I was professionally ordinary. A person can survive being unloved for longer than people think. What breaks them is realizing they were studied incorrectly by the person they trusted most. Then Elias played the second piece, an audio segment. Daniel's voice filled the room. If he pushes back, we question his competence at work and squeeze early. Quiet men don't usually fight hard once you isolate them. There it was. No ambiguity, no charm, no plausible misreading. The room remained motionless. Elias let the silence sit a moment, then spoke with surgical calm. Given the undisclosed personal relationship, the strategic interference, and the apparent effort to shape non-commercial pressure around a private marital situation during transaction review, this board is suspending further trust in Mr. Okeke's advisory role, effective immediately. Daniel finally tried to speak. He used words like misunderstanding, context, private matter, selective framing. But authority leaves a man in layers, and once the first layer strips away, the rest usually follow fast. He looked at Amara for support. She did not even turn toward him. That was the moment I understood she had just discovered she was not his partner in manipulation. She was one of its assets. A board member asked Amara whether she intended to contest the integrity of the due diligence chain now visible before her. She looked at the screen, at my name, at the report she had unknowingly walked into like a trap she had set for herself. Then she said, voice barely above normal, "No." It was the first honest answer I had heard from her in months. Daniel was escorted from the room soon after. Not dramatically. No shouting, no scene. Just a door opening, a request repeated, a jaw tightening, a man gathering his dignity in pieces small enough to carry. Then the room returned to business. That is the coldest thing about high-level humiliation. After the truth detonates, paperwork still wants signatures. The board imposed conditions: independent audit, disclosure amendments, temporary distancing from Daniel, and all related side communication. Fresh governance certifications. Amara agreed to every one of them. She asked 2 precise questions about scope, 1 about timing. None about me. When the session ended, people rose slowly, gathering documents, speaking in voices carefully emptied of opinion. Nobody wanted to be the first person to look directly at the marriage inside the scandal. I collected my folder and stood. That is when Amara spoke. Kofi. Just my name. No title. No defense. No excuse. I turned. For the first time in years, she looked smaller than her ambition. Not weak. Human. And I realized something I did not expect to feel. Not triumph. Distance. The kind that arrives when someone finally sees your worth at the exact moment you no longer need them to. Elias asked me to wait in an adjacent room while final board notes were completed. I sat alone near the window, looking out across the city. Traffic moved below. The sky was hard white. Somewhere, a printer kept spitting pages no one would remember in a week. 20 minutes later, the door opened. Amara entered alone. No portfolio, no performance, no Daniel. She stood there for a moment like she wasn't sure whether I was still someone she had permission to approach. Then she sat across from me. I withdrew the settlement draft, she said. I said nothing. I called my attorney from the corridor. I told her to start again. Still, I said nothing. She took one slow breath and looked down at her hands. I didn't know it was you. There are apologies that reveal more than they repair. That one told me exactly how she had seen me all this time. Not as a man beneath her. Worse. As a man outside the category of possibility. She continued. Daniel told me you had no leverage, no real assets, no structure beyond your salary. He said if things turned ugly, it would be easy to control the timing. I asked her one question. And you believed him? She closed her eyes briefly. Yes. No drama, no tears yet. Just the terrible simplicity of truth. Then she said something that surprised me. I thought quiet meant dependent. That line might have hurt most of all, because it was honest enough to explain years in one sentence. I leaned back and looked at her for a long moment. Quiet means I didn't spend my life auditioning for respect, I said. You confuse that with weakness because people around you only understand noise. Her face changed then. Not defensiveness. Recognition. The real punishment in some moments is not exposure. It is clarity. She started to say my name again, but I lifted a hand gently. I'm not interested in hearing that you were manipulated, I said. You were. I can see that now. But you were also willing. And those are two different sins. That made her look away. Outside the glass, the city kept moving with complete indifference to private devastation. Eventually, she said, very quietly, I was wrong about the man I chose. And I was wrong about the man I married. This time I believed her. But belief and restoration are not the same thing. We talked another 10 minutes. About legal cleanup. About asset disclosure. About the apartment. About timelines. No romance. No nostalgia. Just two people standing in the ash of a story only one of them had set on fire. When she stood to leave, she paused at the door. Then she said, You were the safest thing in my life, and I treated you like you were the smallest. And for one dangerous second, I almost let grief speak for me. I almost told her how many nights I stayed awake fixing her decks before investor meetings. How many times I defended her name in rooms where people resented successful women. How many family insults I swallowed because I thought loyalty required silence. How many pieces of myself I kept soft so her life could stay sharp. But the past does not become more valuable just because the person who wasted it has finally learned to count. So I only said this. You didn't lose me when you chose him. You lost me when you stopped seeing me.
Then I left the room. The divorce did not become a war. Not because Amara was suddenly noble, because the math had changed. The board knew. The advisory chain was visible. The hidden assumptions about my worth were dead. The pressure strategy had failed. Once predators realize the prey has documents, witnesses, and dignity, they often rediscover civility with amazing speed. Over the next 6 months, the legal process moved cleanly. Assets were split fairly. My private advisory entity was formally separated and protected. The apartment was sold. Daniel disappeared from every serious conversation around the deal. And Amara, from what I heard through people who still knew people, spent most of that year rebuilding credibility she had almost handed away. I moved. Not far at first. Just enough. A furnished apartment near Kilimani with terrible curtains and one excellent chair by the window where the evening light hit the room like forgiveness. I expanded the advisory business under my real name. Not because I needed to prove anything, because for the first time, there was no value in hiding what I had built. Clients came, then larger clients.
Then, a partnership offer from a regional governance group that had seen my work inside the Mavuno file and preferred the man who had written the caution to the people who had ignored it. That is one thing the world does eventually get right. Serious people recognize substance faster than social climbers do. My mother came to visit after I signed my first major independent contract under my own name. She stood in my new office, ran a hand across the desk, and smiled that small, proud smile African mothers keep locked away until they are sure the moment deserves it. "You see?" she said. "A roof." I laughed. Then I hugged her longer than men are usually taught to. Some months later, on a cool Sunday afternoon, I saw Amara again. Not in a boardroom, not in court, not in some dramatic final scene the universe had staged for emotional symmetry. In a cafe. Westlands, outdoor seating, plain black coffee. No assistants, no glow of importance orbiting her. Just Amara. She looked older, though not by much. More accurate somehow, as if ambition had stopped retouching her face. She noticed me and stood halfway, uncertain. I asked if I could sit. She nodded. We talked like strangers who knew too much. She told me the audit was complete. The company survived. Daniel had tried something similar elsewhere and failed. Her brother no longer gave financial opinions at family tables. That almost made me smile. Then she told me something I did not expect. "The night I saw your name on that screen," she said, "I realized I had built my whole judgment of you on what you never felt the need to advertise." I stirred my coffee and let her continue. "I kept thinking power had to look a certain way," she said. "Loud, demanding, always visible. I didn't understand that steadiness is its own kind of power until it was too late." That sentence would have meant everything a year earlier. Now it meant truth, which is valuable, but not enough. She looked at me and asked the question I suppose wounded people always want to ask once they understand consequence. "Did you ever hate me?" I thought about it honestly. "No," I said. "I hated what you made possible around me. I hated how easy you found it to convert love into strategy. But hate is expensive, Amara. And I had already spent enough on us." She cried then. Not violently, not performatively. Just 2 tears she didn't wipe away fast enough. I did not reach for her hand. Mercy is not always touch. Sometimes mercy is refusing to fake comfort you no longer possess. When I stood to leave, she asked if I thought she would ever find peace. I told her the truth. "Only after you stop calling clarity punishment." Then I walked away. I did not look back. And that, more than the boardroom, more than the audio, more than the signatures on the file, was the moment I knew I was free. Because freedom is not when the other person finally understands your value. Freedom is when their understanding no longer controls your sense of it. If you are listening to me right now, and you have spent years being the quiet one, the dependable one, the one who carries more than people know because you were taught that love should be humble and strength should be silent, hear me carefully. Silence is not weakness. Privacy is not emptiness. Gentleness is not lack. Some of the most dangerous mistakes people make happen when they assume the calm person in the room has no second horizon. Sometimes the one they mocked has receipts. Sometimes the one they dismissed built the foundation. Sometimes the one they tried to manage is the only reason the whole structure didn't collapse sooner. And sometimes, by the time they finally see you clearly, you have already learned how to live without their vision. That is not revenge. That is restoration. So tonight, if this story hits something real in you, I want you to remember one thing. Never shrink what you are just because arrogant people only respect what is loud. Build quietly if you must. Heal privately if you need to. Leave cleanly when the truth arrives. But never, ever let somebody else's blindness become your self-definition. If this story stayed with you, subscribe, like the video, and tell me in the comments, do you think Amara deserved that final conversation? Or should Kofi have walked away much sooner? And if you've ever been underestimated until the truth exposed everything, I want to hear your story too.